Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to Footy Rants. I'm Benny Matthews. Um, Solo today, like I said from the outset of podcast one last week. I'll try and get Blake or who any other sort of guest that I can get on the platform, and just because I believe that type of conversation rather than just what I'm presenting to you now, this one-way dialogue, is a little bit more entertaining. But in saying that, putting some sort of content out beats no content. So yeah, look, a very very interesting first week of rugby league. We see here. Should also mention for you guys that are on Facebook Live, if you are watching this after the fact, like so after I've gone live, I would recommend heading over to YouTube and trying to jump on the link there, just because I'm doing a simulcast with the NRL website with the stats and stuff. So I'll be talking over the top of that, just so you've got a bit more of a visual aid and something that's a little bit more sexy, I guess, for a lack of a better word. Yeah, so the ladder after round one, there's probably four teams in there that after last year's season we wouldn't really expect that they'd get a round one win. So those teams for me are the Warriors, West Tigers, Titans, and Knights. Not four teams that you would probably expect to see in the top eight, albeit round one. So 1 to 8, we have the Dragons, Storm, Warriors, Panthers, Cowboys, Tigers, Titans, and Knights, all with round one victories, which obviously leaves us with Manly, the Raiders, Roosters, Sharks, Para, Rabbitohs, Bulldogs, Broncos, all still waiting for their round one victory. So to dive into things off the back of game one, we've got to go back to Thursday night now between the Dragons and the Broncos. So Dragons came away 34 points to 12 victors. We see there on the scorecard, James Roberts was pretty much the only effective Broncos attacker. Well, where do I even start? I know I said off the back of the first podcast with Blake at the start of the week, I love to hang shit on Broncos supporters and the club in itself, but oh man, I've almost got to feel like a little bit of pity and sorrow for him, because I honestly don't know where you begin to try and repair the faults of Thursday night. It was just such a disjointed, well, not even a just disjointed performance. I think disjointed would insinuate that there were times of flow, and there wasn't very many of those. The halves, to say the least, in Nicarima and Milford were utterly disappointing, and I think that's being quite kind. I know that the savagery of Bronx supporters that I've spoken to so far have been a lot more harsh than that. But yeah, for those following along on YouTube, I'll scroll down there. So your biggest performers for the night were Jack DeBellin, who was absolutely massive in the forward pack for the Dragons. Leeson Armel was also great off the bench, and he finished with the most run meters there. We can see with 175. DeBellin finished with the top tackles on 32. But for me, where it all sort of started to come together for the Dragons, it was just the way that Ben Hunt was able to play a bit more direct, which they haven't really been able to rely on a dominant half in the past, having the likes of Josh McCrone there and whatnot, and Benji Marshall the seasons previous, but having a direct and a bit more of a traditional halfback in Ben Hunt allowed Gareth Widdop and Matt Duffy to almost mirror each other's roles, to really play on the footy, sweeping around each of those edges, much like Darius Boyd did for the Broncos and continues to do. And he was a massive part of their two solitary tries. So yeah, that I feel that's where the three-prong attack really start to come together for the Dragons. In my opinion, and we'll delve into every other game, but this was probably the poorest game as far as quality goes for the entire round. We look down there, and it's any wonder the Broncos couldn't really get into the game. You look at, I like this new stat that the NRL has on the website, time in possession, and it was 36 and a half minutes to 24 and a half minutes. So when you're giving away 12 minutes of footy to the opposition, you're going to be fucking very hard pressed in winning any sort of football game. And you follow that up with 64% completion rate, so they completed only 21 of 33 sets. in comparison to 71%, which still by NRL standards, you're really trying to chip away at that 80% mark, if not better. So both teams well below par. And again, I guess that comes back to it being round one. So it's definitely not panic stations for either club yet. And I think that's an important thing for Broncos fans to, I guess, to try and fall back on, not to necessarily use it as an excuse, because I think you've got a lot to answer for. And where, like I said, where do you find that improvement, especially when you're coming up against the Cowboys in round two? And realistically, I don't know. I honestly don't know where that improvement lies for the Broncos. The short kicking game of Milford was dreadful. The lack of ownership for direction for the side from both of the halves was very, very ordinary. Fundamentally, it is really, really concerning. Just as a Queensland fan, also that if we're looking at someone like an Anthony Milford who got a taste of Origin before getting injured last year, if he carries that over the next 6 weeks, I don't even think he's in the fray. Even with having that game under his belt, I honestly just don't think you can consider him further down the track. So very, very worrying signs for the Broncos. Just sort of bear with me for those that are following on with YouTube. They don't have individual stats of the players like they did last season. I really think that was a great way to sort of make some comparisons. So, even bouncing back towards the Dragons attack, the mismatches that both Blake and I sort of mentioned leading into the preview for round one, of Ewan Aitken and Jordan Kahu, was very, very evident. It very much looked like a man playing against a boy in that setting. Just the physicality and just playing one in. Jordan Kahu obviously spending a lot of his time between the wing and fullback position, not really adept to centre. I think the way the game's gone, you very much need bigger bodies that are playing in the line of defence. Centre is the hardest position to defend. Constantly having to double defend and work with your half and winger. It's having that faith initially, and I think having those new halves and a centre that isn't familiar with that position in Jordan Kahu was really evident in a seasoned centre in Ewan Aitken. This is his third or fourth season now. Despite it being an injury disrupted 2017, he very much looked like he was back and he just carries his weight really well for a bigger guy. He doesn't look too messy at all. So when you've got the awkwardness of finishes in the game, like Jason Nightingale, and then you've also got a big rangy body like Nene McDonald, I think they complement each other extremely well. So look, the Dragons are only going to get better. They've got Cronulla this week, who we will get into in the Cowboys review. We're a little bit under par as well, but I think it sets things up nicely. They're coming off the back of a really big win, the Dragons. They'll want to keep that momentum going. However, the Sharks played a much more quality opposition and were very, very competitive and probably felt they got themselves into positions where they should have won that game. So it'll be interesting to see how both teams respond. I'm really looking forward to that game come round two. Righty, we'll move forward now into the thriller. The Golden Point thriller between Newcastle and Manly. I was sitting there once it did go to extra time and just feeling sorry for both clubs, having to go the best part of 90 minutes to get a result in this match. And I guess this is where the debate sort of rises, is do we just split the points? Do they both deserve a draw? Or does the entertainment value of this 1918, you've got a bit of a fairy tale-esque start for Mitchell Pearce at Newcastle, especially because the Roosters did lose round one. But I don't think you really could have asked too much more of Mitchell Pearce. If anything, observing the game, I thought he tried a little bit too hard. Having Connor Watson at 6, I felt Connor Watson sort of played a little bit of a step behind, and he wasn't really confident in his back row centre wing combination in digging into the line. It was a lot of step off the right foot and just take the ball to the line, because obviously he's used to taking the ball to the line, playing 9 and 1 predominantly when he did play at the Roosters. So yeah, I felt once Slade Griffin came off and Connor Watson moved to 9 and Brock Lamb came into the halves, that's where I felt that Newcastle really sort of started to get their mojo. Let's have a look at some of the stats down here. Big performers there. So we've got top of your tackle count, Api Coruscant for Manly, 66 tackles, and George Tafua returning from ACL reconstruction, which didn't see him play a game since June last year, if I'm correct, with the most run meters there of 239. Was absolutely electric. Scored a couple of tries, if I'm not mistaken. No, he only ended up with one. He got denied one. That's right. Yeah, look, it was pretty even, and the stats sort of say that it was a close game. But the biggest stat I think that Trent Barrett will be most disappointed with was, again, similar to the Broncos' completion rate. When you're competing against a side that completes at 87%, and that's the sort of NRL standard that I was sort of leading off with, that they are chasing week in, week out, and Manly match that with 67. When you're giving up 20% in completions, they're lucky that they only went down by 1. You could argue that if they just clean that stat up, they already did have more time in possession, albeit only about a minute or two. But if they hold that footy a lot longer, that ekes into another few minutes, and it really prevents Newcastle from having those scoring opportunities that they did. So Newcastle did extremely well, even after starting so well, with Kalen Ponga scoring within the opening minutes. It was a really fast start, and then George Tafua replied with his try. So it was 6-6 after only under 10 minutes, and then it really got into that arm wrestle, and that's what I was keen to see, because I thought that the Manly forwards would have held a little bit of superiority over the Newcastle forwards, more so for continuity. I guess the two back rowers that lacked during the game for me were both Aiden Guerra and Curtis Sirinen. They were both really disappointing. Came up with a couple of costly errors just taking the ball at the line. So I really like to see a vast improvement in those guys. Probably more so Aiden Guerra. You're getting signed from a top 4 club for a reason, to really try and I guess bring that leadership, that big game experience. He's played Origin footy, albeit he did get dropped last year. It's hard to see him getting back in those sort of circles. Just with the quality of back rows that you got coming through, the likes of Kafusi, Cohen, Hess, you sort of feel like he's done his dash, unfortunately. But that doesn't mean that he shouldn't be offering up some greater quality for a struggling club, and a club that's in a very much a rebuilding phase that Newcastle are in. Just running through a few more stats, you look at it and it really was Manly's to lose, and unfortunately they did just that. I felt they lost their cool when push come to shove. Daly, albeit Daly Cherry Evans, that is, as polite as he is, you could tell with the referees he was getting extremely frustrated, but probably not as much as Jake Trbojevic. Once I seen him snap with about 10 minutes to go, he just absolutely lost the plot. Was blowing up at the referee, couldn't handle the penalties around the ruck. It was hard to watch someone who normally elicits such composure and leadership beyond his years, and that was evident in his rep season last year for both New South Wales and Australia. But to give away, that they ended up in front on the penalty count, so they only conceded 9 in comparison to Newcastle's 11 penalties. But those errors, 17 versus 6, that's what loses your footy games. But once that momentum swayed the opposite way, Manly just couldn't get the momentum back. And that Cherry Evans, for mine, probably didn't get himself in the best positions when he was taking that field goal attempt. It actually looked like they were going to send the ball back to Lachlan Croker to try and steal the cookies, but I guess it also just showed what Blake Green did offer in the ways of calm, positive influence around the ruck, as far as a halfback goes, and how much he really helped complemented Daly Cherry Evans' game. Now that they don't really have a dominant 6, it puts a lot more pressure on Cherry Evans to perform, get his hands on the footy a lot more, and be a lot more positive with his kick chase. And just didn't happen, unfortunately. Not to say that Croker played a terrible game. He's only very, very young, and he's only going to improve, much like a lot the likes of Brock Lamb and Nathan Cleary have started to develop their game in the halves over the years. So, look, it'll be very interesting to see how Manly bounce back. They come up against Parramatta, who also lost. So there's a few teams that are coming together that are both coming off losses this week, and I think we're going to start to see more how they start to act under pressure, because you don't really want to start accumulating losses at the start of the season. So, Trent, he just asked a question here on Facebook Live. Aussie jersey gone to his head. I'm assuming that you're talking about Trbojevic there, Treno. No, I don't think the Aussie jersey has gone to his head by any means. When I was observing it, I was watching it with my mate Jace at the time. I think we both sort of discussed perhaps it was more the attitude around the game, even though there was a number of changes and a lot of experienced players that have come into the Newcastle lineup. I think Manly felt as though it would take a little bit longer for those combinations to click and have too much of an effect. So, yeah, for me, I think it was more a case of underestimating their opposition. And when it was evident that they were actually going to compete straight off the bat, and also I think the policing of the ruck has obviously changed this season. You've got the play the ball rule that's changed. I was of the understanding that the rule as it stands, even today, is it's as long as you're making an attempt to play the ball. So if there was movement of the foot towards the ball, even if the foot does not touch the ball directly, that still constitutes a play the ball. But it seems the way that the referees are ruling at present, the foot must touch the ball. And there were a few penalties around that play the ball, even just holding in the ruck and stuff like that. It just started to get a little bit gross. And I think the players are just going to take a little bit of time to I guess, acclimatise to that standard of refereeing. But once they do, I think the forward pack of Manly, you've got Adam Fanua-Blake who stood up wonderfully, and then Marty Tapau, Sean Lane was great. I thought it was great to see him develop again after last year when he came up from reserve grade from that Blacktown Workers side. He definitely didn't disappoint. I think if they can continue to develop his game on the edge and get that offload more confident with an outside back that is aware of that and pushing up on the footy, that's going to make a market improvement for what he can bring to the team as well. So look, thoroughly disappointing for the Manly side. I think it was good for the town of Newcastle to get off to a winning way. I think it just relieves that initial pressure off the back of Coach Nathan Brown and say, look, we are starting to build towards something. I don't want to go getting carried away. It's only round one, tick, 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 tick. But we're only going to get better. Their performance, yes, they held the footy. I still think that there's still plenty that they can work on in looking to utilise those outside backs. As I said, because of the way that Connor Watson started initially, I felt they really played sort of that 30 to 70 shape. So what that basically means is just sort of the outside of the left post or the outside of the right post. They didn't really play sideline to sideline footy. Both of their outside backs didn't touch the ball all that often. I'm pretty sure coming into the last 10 minutes, Matautia and Kennydale hadn't even had a carry yet. So, and that may be the style of play that Brown's looking for, to hold their width and not really look for their outside backs to come in looking for work. But, it's that would surprise me if that was the case. So yeah, they're only going to improve, but I would like to see that more expansive play. And like I said, I think that started to happen a little bit more once Connor Watson got out at 6. So, that they've got plenty of power around the halves there. It's going to be interesting to see what they decide to do moving forward. Obviously, Danny Levi not in the 17 at present. I thought Brock Lamb looked a lot better in the half. So do they then just make that a straight swap and Connor Watson and Slade Griffin become partners? Because I thought Slade Griffin got to showcase his abilities a little bit more as a starting 9. Super solid in defence. Provides a super crisp ball out of 9. I'm really excited to see what happens over the next 6 weeks for Newcastle moving forward. Yeah, Manly, they have to respond against Parramatta, but, they're going to be absolutely filthy with the position that they put themselves in after round one as well. But again, we'll get to that a little bit later. Into the next game. So game 3, the second game of Friday night was the Cowboys versus Sharks up in Townsville. Cowboys came away with a win, 20-14. And I guess that's about the positive. That's the biggest positive that you take away is you've walked away with 2 competition points. You're on the board as far as the premiership ladder is concerned. For me, as a Broncos fan, as a Cowboys fan, I beg my pardon, that's about where it ends. It was thoroughly frustrating as a supporter to just watch the game. It was very, very clunky. It was almost reminiscent of the Dragons Broncos as far as the game started. And if we have a look at some of the stats, we'll even skip past some of the players there, but just completion rates. So 66% in favour of the Cowboys to 62%. So basically the same. So 25 of 38 for the Cowboys and 20 of 32 for Cronulla. It was pretty hard footy to watch at times, to be fair. And the great Jonathan Thurston, in such a landmark game being his 300th game, I don't think I've seen him play that bad. In all honesty, I cannot remember seeing him play that bad. He just lacked a little bit of match fitness, I think. You see him, he was labouring on the ground at times and staring at blokes, and you could just, I don't think he was saying anything, but you could just read it in his body language that he was struggling a little bit. And I think having Tamari Martin have to come in for the late withdrawal of Michael Morgan might have thrown him a little bit there. And then also not having Lachlan Coote out the back as he normally would. So playing off the back of a forward pack that had Matt Scott still working his way back into things. Again, I would love to have the individual player stats there. But I remember there was a time where I think he only had 50-odd running meters. So him and Jordan McLean really sort of struggled to get into the game. The shining light was obviously Jason Taumalolo, who we can see there, finished with 177 metres, so he was top of the run metres for the night. So he sort of picked up where he left off, which is great to see as a fan. And Cohen Hess was also outstanding off the bench, scored on his second touch straight back underneath the post. And, it wasn't like it was a massive gaping hole. It was just sort of working his way back around the ruck and got back into the post on a good, strong hard line. So really good to see him building his confidence again. And they'll no doubt be looking to him to push for a starting spot, to keep the pressure on the likes of Gavin Cooper and Ethan Lowe. So, there were periods of time last year where he did force Ethan Lowe, even though he sort of was under an injury cloud with that neck drama. But, outside of the clunkiness, I think if you're looking from the perspective of Cronulla, they really would have felt like they should have at least hit the lead towards the end there to put some pressure back on the Cowboys, especially when it was 16-14. Another stat that obviously illustrates the off night that Jonathan Thurston had was his goal kicking, only 2 from 5, and someone that holds themselves to such a standard that Jonathan Thurston does, he'll undoubtedly be absolutely filthy on himself. So sitting back and sort of surmising all the landscape of what's come away from that game, it fills me with confidence leading into round 2 against Brisbane this weekend. More so in the sense of, well, if we were lacking the likes of Coote and Morgan and JT played that badly, what happens when JT turns things around? Because he's just not gonna play 2 bad games in a row. I'm very, very confident he'll come out and he'll kick really well this weekend. He'll work on his first up contact in defence. That's where I felt he really lacked defensively, just giving away cheap penalties, just because it looked like he was tired, like he couldn't get the first up contact to wrap the attacking player to get bumped off. And there was a period of plays there where he kicked the ball dead on the full, and then he gave away a penalty on the second or third tackle straight away, and that really put the Cowboys under the pump. So yeah, there's going to be some vast improvements that are required of JT as a leader, and no doubt that will occur. I have full faith in the legend that is JT, that he'll bounce back, and you know, you give him a packed out Suncorp Stadium, and he's going to perform 100 out of 100 times. He's very much a player that loves to rise to an occasion, and I very much look forward as a Cowboys supporter what he's going to bring to the table now. And Jordan McLean and Matt Scott are only going to get better as they play more footy together, and they'll be no doubt hungry. I think there's a lot for Paul Green to pick apart from the Broncos' performance, and really try and nullify even more so what the Dragons were able to do. And I think that just comes to playing some nice direct footy. It's not rocket science. Win the ruck, dominate the ruck. The only Brisbane forward who really showed much ticker on Thursday was Tavita Pangai Jr. So, and he's coming off the bench where they lacked, sort of just to get back to game one again, was with McCulloch coming off the bench. I think having him come off the bench, it's for obvious reasons. He's trying to get his match fitness back up with the ACL, much like the Rabbitohs are doing with Greg Inglis and playing him in the centres, just so the running load isn't so high. But it just puts a lot more stress on your forwards around the ruck that are expecting ball, that are used to getting ball at a certain speed and frequency, being able to hit the ad line. It was really noticeable when he wasn't there how poor the delivery out of dummy half was. That's, you can't really put too much pressure on Sam Thaiday, for fuck's sake. He's a middle. So you can't expect him to go throwing the best dummy half passes. He's the world's biggest dummy half. But yeah, there's plenty for the Cowboys to try and chip away at. As for Cronulla, is that new combination of Dugan at centre and Moylan in the halves, is that the best setup? Is that the best way to set your spine up for Cronulla? In my opinion, no. I would have Dugan out the back, and I would push Valentine Holmes back to the wing. After coming off such a successful World Cup campaign and scoring so many fucking tries on the wing, why wouldn't you put the world's best winger on the fucking wing? Especially when, Dugan's played fullback at representative level as well. It's a no-brainer for me. I thought of all the signings and the new halves combinations and whatnot, I thought Moylan was the poorest. I think he's now under the most pressure to perform. And coming up against the Dragons this week and talking about that shape that they're able to play with now off the back of Hunt and being able to use Widdop and Dufty on either edge and just show up with inside-outside plays and stuff like that. That to me is worrying for the Sharks. If I have to give big, especially on their edges, they're going to be a little bit frail now. Kurt Capewell coming in for the injured Luke Lewis. I think we're going to see Lewis out for a number of weeks yet with that plantar fascia injury. It just put a lot more pressure on the likes of Wade Graham and Andrew Fafita, and you can see it started to get to them. The completions coming out of trouble. You don't often see guys like Wade Graham and Paul Gallen coming up with errors when they're bringing the ball out of trouble, and I'm pretty sure Fafita came up with an error coming out of trouble as well. So when they're the leaders of your forward pack and they're feeling that pinch, that's not a good sign. For me, it was good to see the intent still there defensively. I thought Fafita was massive. There was a period of time where they were coming off their own line in defence, and I think he made might have even been 5 tackles in a row. He was really, really good. And this is coming from a stout Queensland supporter and someone who loves to hate blue. But yeah, Fafita really impressed me there. Love him or hate him. And I guess he needs to try and drag a few more blokes with him, and having the likes of Matt Pryor, who can just get about their work. I think it's important that he tries to step up to that standard and almost create that sort of unorthodox partnership, sort of like Vaughan and Packer did last year. And, Vaughan just got about his work as a traditional front rower who got a bit of an offload going, and Packer just ripped in. So I really hope that the forward pack can, hold a little bit more footy, continue to be ruthless in defence, and whatever happens in those outside backs, if there are any changes, look, it'll be interesting to see if Flanagan does make any changes straight away. I would be tempted to. The worst case is you trial it again, it doesn't improve, and then you just go back to what you initially had. But for all intents and purposes, I think it's better to change it too early than too late. So again, bit of a disappointing game. It would have been great to see the Cowboys put Cronulla away a lot earlier. You know, you win some, you lose some. I think both teams are going to be far improved for the hit out come round 2, and I expect them both to win in round 2. Moving on to the Tigers Roosters. Well, this is arguably the upset of the round, especially with the amount of positive signings that the Roosters, a powerhouse club, added to their list. You know, you had the likes of Cronk and Tedesco coming into the ranks, albeit Luke Keary didn't end up becoming fit for the game. Mitch Cornish was forced to start at 6. West Tigers. I mean, after hearing that Josh Reynolds was out, who would have thought that it was even within the realms of possibility to win a game? But again, a bit of a sloppy start to the game. Both sides were just really struggling to get through their sets and complete with any sort of positivity or purpose. It sort of, you know, the Tigers dominated possession for the majority of the first half, but just really lacked the ability to get to a point on the field where they could actually do anything. You know, sort of just a lackluster kick, or, you know, they try run the ball down a short side. And again, you know, that is going to happen. I understand that when you've got the likes of Josh Reynolds, is expected to provide so much leadership and direction to the team, and then all of a sudden he's out for the first, you know, I think it's first 4 or 5 rounds with a hamstring strain again. So it's a real shame to see someone pick up an injury like that, and it sort of continues to become an issue. It's an injury that once becomes a problem, especially in an aging player, it very much becomes a major factor in the running load that they can handle during a given week, and the amount of rest and, you know, massage and physio that is required to maintain it. Especially someone who, if they're playing good enough football, is in talking circles of rep honours, especially when we're talking about Brad Fittler taking over as Blues coach this season. So any sort of changes are really up in the air, to be perfectly honest. So yeah, for those that are watching via YouTube there, we can see the top performers. No great surprise that the likes of someone like an Elijah Taylor and Jake Friend are at the top of the tackle counts. Outside backs, you can see where they both sides try to start to play around the edges. Blake Ferguson finished with 268 running meters, which is off the charts for round 1, and he looked really dominant with the footy. And when he was put back into space, you know, Tedesco come up with that really poor error. He catches that, they win the game. It's as simple as that. See, Travis just joined, mate. You'll be absolutely stoked that the Tigers are up round 1, and I guess as a Tigers fan, you're almost ecstatic that you're able to rub salt into the wound of the former son in James Tedesco. Other big bold moves that paid off for Coach Ivan Cleary. Corey Thompson, controversially selected over, you know, arguably their best player from last year, David Norfoluma. Did not disappoint. Did extremely well to score that try in the corner, which gave him, or put them in the position to win. Tuilola here stood up and smoked that goal from the sideline, and you could see what it meant to the players that were on the bench. You see the whole bench went up, the crowd went up behind them. I think it's just good for the game to see the likes of some of these clubs that have been struggling in previous years. Like I said at the top of the podcast, the Warriors, the Titans, and now the Tigers, to get wins on the board round 1. I think it just repays faith in the fans that stick by these clubs that go through these struggling times, and, you know, they don't have the rosters that naturally draw more good players on top of that. It's not always an easy thing to achieve, but it's good to see some of those struggling clubs were able to get off on a positive start. Again, you sort of split it down the middle. It was pretty similar to Newcastle and Manly, in the fact that possession was pretty close, but almost mirroring the stat. Comes down to the completion rate. The Tigers completed at 84%. The Roosters complete at 68%. Hold more footy, do more with footy, win footy match. It seems super simple when you lay out certain black and white stats in rugby league, but it's pretty evident that that's not the simplest way to win games of footy. There's a lot more that sort of goes into it. So we're just sneaking through a few more stats. Yeah, so again, it ultimately just came down to errors. The Tigers gave away 3 more penalties. They had that sin bin, but I don't know if it was a change of the guard in that halves lineup of Cooper Cronk coming in. Did the forward pack struggle to sort of respond playing in front of the likes of Cooper Cronk when they've been used to playing under Mitchell Pearce for so long? I don't know. I don't know if I really have a fixed answer for that. I think even at half time, everyone was just expecting the Roosters to just get going, and it just never happened. There were periods of time where they really started to get their flow happening, and they were getting plenty of tackles inside the Tigers 20, and it just kept petering out with sort of lack of intent on the footy when kicks were going through, and letting away or giving away cheap possession rather than getting repeat sets through defence. They were getting footy out of the in goal of the Tigers. So yeah, I don't know what Trent Robertson sort of says to his playing group. For me, it'd just be sending a rocket up them, and there are players there that wear rep jerseys. They don't even have to think about it. They know they're getting a rep jersey every single season that need to step up that didn't. I think they'll be a very much improved football team once Luke Keary comes back, especially with his dynamic running game. We see how much he can split a team in half on that edge, particularly either in broken play or when you get a few rucks, quick play the ball, and even at times off a scrum. I've seen him split a few teams there just with sort of bringing that player underneath and playing with some shape that just hold some of those defenders up on the outside. So yeah, it all of a sudden puts that little bit of added pressure on the Roosters and the likes of Cooper Cronk to step up, and I look forward to seeing how they do respond and what the Tigers do to build off that. I think the game management of someone like Benji Marshall in that match, which we haven't really seen for a number of seasons, didn't really do it with great vigour at Brisbane. Was obviously heavily criticised in his time in St George. But to see him come back to his home club where it all started way back when, in the early 2000s, to put together a performance like that and now know that he's got some time to continue to build that and say, hey, look, even though I am a player that's winding down in my career, I've still got something to offer here. So yeah, I'm really excited to see what Benji Marshall can do with this team and what sort of I guess experience and confidence he brings to some of the new players. Continue to build a combination with the likes of Tuilola here. It just takes that pressure off Luke Brooks. Mitchell Moses and Tedesco have moved on for all intents and purposes. This is his team to build on now. So what can he do gaining off Benji Marshall that he can then, once Reynolds is back, say, hey, this is where we're at, and then almost bring new life back to Josh Reynolds. So it's, as unfortunate as it is that Reynolds is out, I think it's an important and, I guess, positive time for Luke Brooks to develop even further now under someone like Benji Marshall. So, yeah, it's great to see some of those struggling clubs get up early on. Bit of an open game, this next one. The Rabbitohs and Warriors, which was the first game of the doubleheader over in Perth. I was expecting quite an open game. The scoreline of 32 points to 20 in favour of the Warriors doesn't surprise me. It doesn't surprise me that the Warriors won and still conceded 20 points. We know how hot and cold they can be. And the Rabbitohs, I thought that they'll no doubt be disappointed with letting in 32 points, especially because they are known for having quite a big dominant forward pack. But yeah, the Warriors looked great around the ruck. I think for once, for once, and something that we're not seeing from round one, is they showed composure around the ruck. They didn't necessarily push every single pass that was on. And I think that came from, and no doubt if you did watch the game, it came off the back of that call that Isaac Luke looks fit as fuck. He looks really, really good. I've seen some photos on Instagram during the preseason of some of the training he was doing with Nathaniel Roach, who's now out for the season with a back disc injury, and that's why Carl Lawton got picked up from the Titans. But obviously some of the work that Nathaniel Roach was putting in sort of put a rocket up Isaac Luke's ass to say, look, I'm probably going to get the nod here because I'm more experienced, but it just comes to a point where if you've got a physical freak who's playing good footy, reputations and rep jerseys count for sweet fuck all. So it's great to see that sort of come out, and no doubt he would have had a point to prove, having won a premiership with the Rabbitohs as well, coming up against his old club. But yeah, I tend to agree with the commentary that said that it was arguably his best game, his finest hour in a Warriors jersey. So let's hope that they continue to build off that. New recruits, Tohu Harris, Adam Blair, were quite sound. And that calming effect around the ruck, I think, was shown again with what Blake Green brought to Manly. I thought he did the exact same thing, and it's worked. It's obvious why Kearney was after someone like Blake Green, even though he is an older guy. We've seen what he was able to do, even at the Melbourne Storm, in complementing Cooper Cronk and in taking them to the grand final against Cronulla in 2016. So, look, the scoreline, it probably doesn't reflect the opportunities. Well, I guess it does. It does reflect the opportunities that the Rabbitohs had in as far as we see their time in possession was just about even. But again, it comes down to that completion rate. If you're sharing similar amounts of time with the football, but you're just turning it over and not capitalize the how do I best put it? The value put on just completing a set, even if it's nothing fancy, it's just the fact that you got to the end of the set, you got your kick away, you got a solid kick chase, you control the first 2 or 3 rucks of the set. That goes a long way into building confidence and momentum. And momentum is a super, super powerful thing in the game of rugby league, and we'll see how powerful it was once we cover these last 2 games to finish off round 1. And after the first 2 trial matches of both the World Club Challenge and the Charity Shield from the Rabbitohs, I was really coming to expect a lot more of them. I was honestly expecting the likes of Cook to come out and really dominate and set the standard, but it just never really came. Especially, you look at some of the attacking weapons that they've got at their disposal now. You've got Greg Inglis and Gagai that are, it's the most influential centre combination that I can sort of think of. I know I was talking to some mates about this. I don't think of super dominant centre pairings since someone like Cooper and Gaznia. That might be. I'm happy to be proven wrong if you guys out there want to present some other centre combinations that are of that standard. But yeah, that they both should wear Queensland jerseys this year, and they just weren't given the opportunity. Particularly coming out of trouble, there were a few times there in that I felt they stripped the Warriors for numbers on an edge, playing laterally quite early on that just never really amounted to anything. So yeah, new coach Anthony Seibold has got a lot to address with his playing group. You couldn't really ask for the opposition to be put in more of a compromised position, having to travel so far and have such a poor record in Perth, and then come up with that. but yeah, I guess it ultimately just comes back to holding the footy a little bit more and um, yeah, just having faith. Adam Reynolds looked a little bit sketchy at times, and um, his running game along with Cody Walker, um, it just needs to improve. They are such good runners of the footy, but I think Adam Reynolds has obviously been so ingrained in playing under the structure of Michael Maguire for so long. Perhaps he's taking a little while to adapt to this more, well, I assume, free-flowing sort of state of football that Seibold's trying to instill in the group, and that's evidenced in Cook's selection and not Farah, because otherwise you would continue to press for the like of someone like Farah, who is a bit more traditional, also brings a kicking game that Cook doesn't have, whereas Cook has the running game that Farah doesn't have. So, they're obviously trying to play a bit of an up-tempo style of footy, but I just don't think they move the ball to their edges well enough whilst carrying forward momentum. So, yeah, a lot to work on. Big positives for the Warriors again, like I said. Blake Green, big tick in the box. New recruits in Blair and Harris, definitely didn't take a backward step. The likes of Sam Lasone were really, really good, and they're only going to improve as more and more players like Mannering and stuff, once they find their feet there. Let's hope, finally, that all this potential and, looking at teams on paper the Warriors should perform, they've got RTS and Sean Johnson. Let's hope that this is a year for Warriors fans to stand up and actually not be embarrassed for their fucking team to take the field. Bulldogs and Storm. Look, this was a really disappointing performance for the Bulldogs. The fact that they did start so well, we see there that they scored a try within 2 minutes. I was watching the game with some mates, and they're like, how's Brodie Croft going to go? Spent a little bit of time with Brodie in my time at the Storm, and no doubt he's going to develop into one of the game's best halves. And there's all this Cooper Cronk 2.0, and the club's trying to hush it over as like, we just want Brodie Croft to be the best version of Brodie Croft, blah 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 blah. But one area that every single NRL club is going to try and target for as long as it takes him to adapt, much like Mitchell Moses did once he left the Tigers and probably got about 3 or 4 performances into Parramatta, is learn to defend on the edge. He is getting far too nervous and trigger happy, and when he does even get caught in a one-on-one situation, even a one-on-one situation is a result for the opposition team. And that was evidenced in Fatala Mariner, just ran absolutely straight over the top of the young kid. He did that against the Cowboys in the tribute match. He did it in the World Club Challenge against Leeds. So there are going to be times where Croft does struggle, and every opposition team is going to be looking to exploit that. So, that right-hand edge is going to be under all sorts of pressure across the year, and that is Felice Kafusi's job to try and help support that. And if he can help plug that hole, that's only going to be a tick in the box for Kafusi as far as trying to get an Origin jersey in 2018. Aside from that massive negative, in my opinion, from the Melbourne Storm's performance, the biggest positive is, they were lacking Slater. They've moved on from the Cooper Cronk era and were still able to win by 3 converted tries. So the Storm won 36 points to 18. The Bulldogs were sort of just left clambering as to, a case of what if. New recruits, Aaron Woods, he topped the run meters there with 152 for the Bulldogs. But, I thought, let's, with his Lord Farquhar haircut, I thought he was thoroughly unimpressive. There's been a number of new recruits who didn't really live up to the standard, and I felt that he was one of them. Didn't necessarily do anything bad, but it was more a case of he just didn't really do anything of great influence. Time in possession, that sort of probably started to blow out in the latter half of the game once the game was lost. So time in possession there, 37 minutes to close to 32 for the Bulldogs. And again, the Storm will be disappointed with the completions, although they started to improve, 72% versus 68%. So they're basically on par. It was just more so that the Storm did more with it. You run through some of these stats for those that are on YouTube. You can see they're pretty much even. All running meters, Storm finished with about 200 more. Post-contact meters about the same. Line breaks about the same. Tackle breaks are about the same. Bulldogs actually had more. Just did a little bit more on the kick return, and that just comes down to the likes of Vunivalu and Addo Carr, who had an absolute screamer. There's all this talk around him being the fastest bloke in league now, was clocked at 37 k's an hour or something like that. So comparatively, you've got the likes of Usain Bolt, who ticks over at 44 kilometres an hour. So, when you've got a guy that's playing a running-based sport, he's got a ball in his hand, and he's within at least talkable speeds of the fastest in the world. That's a great asset to have as far as speed being something that you can't really coach. But yeah, the Dogs, I think that's probably the more concerning thing again, is the fact that the stats don't really say too much. They say it's quite close, yet you've finished 3 tries down in a side that's still missing some of their best players. So look, again, we start asking questions. Is Mbai out the back the right move? Is moving Hopewadi to centre the right move? How long does it take for Foran to have a bit more of an influence on the game? It's going to be interesting to see where the Dogs go to from here. And to be fair, I don't really know where that is. Frawley was renowned for his kicking game coming off the bench when he was coached by Daz Hasler last year, and did so with quite good intent and got good results. But kicked that one out on the full. They just looked a little bit disjointed. When I initially heard that Frawley was then going to be joined in the halves by Foran, I just wondered whether now Foran, at the point in his career that he is, getting a little bit older, hasn't played consistent footy for the last couple of years, just with the amount of shit, obviously, that's gone on in his private life, and was he going to have a year off footy, and Parramatta gave him the time to step away from the game, and then he ended up signing with the Warriors for what he knew was only going to be 1 year, and then you're sort of like, well, what's the point of moving overseas for 1 year? And then he signs with, I guess, the intent that he's going to be coached under Des Hasler again, and then Hasler gets sacked. So where's his headspace around that? But yeah, more to the style of play of where he's at for his age. He was renowned for being quite a physical half, and playing off the back of someone like Daly Cherry Evans, he was very much more renowned for his running game. Now that Frawley doesn't really have a running game either, he's very much a traditional half. It sort of left me wondering what does Foran bring to the fray? Like, are we going to see his running game at his age again? And I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. And there's one thing to try and develop a running game, and there's another thing to have an effective running game. And is he going to have that influence? Time will tell. Again, we make all these speculations and we get hypercritical or even hyper positive about teams after round one. Fortunately for the teams who didn't win in round one, all is not lost. There's still 24 more opportunities for you to improve on that. For those that didn't win in round one, there's still 24 more opportunities for you to fucking fall off the bandwagon. So, that is the beauty of rugby league. We've got plenty of time to sort of mount good runs, bad runs, get your bad form out of the way, or continue on your winning ways. So, look, it's as far as quality, I felt like both teams are sort of underperforming, and they'll no doubt stand up and account for that. But when the stats read fairly close and the scoreline dictates anything but, I think if I'm a Bulldogs supporter, staff member, player, I'm having a long, hard look at myself in the mirror and thinking, who does need to step up? Because there are some poor defensive efforts. I've been a massive advocate of, his name is evading me, and Adam Elliott. I was actually surprised to see him come off the bench at back row, and it was evidenced why once he did come onto the field, because there was this one-on-one miss that he had getting beaten on the outside. And you just can't in the NRL when you're an edge back rower, you just can't miss one-on-one. And the likes of Curtis Sironen, he got his pants absolutely pulled down within the first 6 minutes against Newcastle with Kalen Ponga in that big goose step, that big in and away on him. So yeah, it just needs to be tighter on the edges. It's no doubt that's where you try and get your mismatches in numbers when you're playing around the ruck and you're looking for those changes, that 6 and 4 split either side of the ruck, and you're trying to pick that number up. And I thought the Cowboys were really good at doing that against Cronulla, and that's where their points did come. So yeah, that's on the Bulldogs to fix defensively, because it was really, really disappointing. Anyway, I'll stop gibbering. I feel like I was gibbering a little bit there. Alrighty, on to the first Super Sunday for the year. And what two games, like very, very similar as far as the momentum shifts. So we saw Penrith end up beating Parramatta 24 points to 14, and with the expectation of Parramatta's performances this year, with Jared Hayne returning home, and I even kicked off the podcast last weekend saying that they're my premiership favourites, even though I did actually tip Penrith. I do think they will find their feet, but yeah, that initial 10 to 15 minutes from Parramatta, I tell you what, if they can continue to emulate that, they're definitely going to be a top 4 contender, and I think they can build towards that premiership as I have predicted. Big changes in the game was evidence when Mitchell Moses went off for the HIA, so you lose him for a quarter of an hour with that. And then he ended up getting sin binned for a tackle infringement around the ruck that was preventing the momentum and try-scoring opportunities for Penrith. So, you're missing a dominant half for quarter of the match. And then someone who would slot into that half position as a utility in Clint Gutherson was also out during injury. So from all reports, he's back, full training, and they're just waiting to see how he handles a few load markers, and then as soon as he ticks those boxes in the physio's opinion, everything will be right as rain, and everyone will continue on. But yeah, look, it was hard to believe that Penrith were even going to be able to find their way back into the game with the start that Parramatta had. And I think, had the disallowed try from Josh Hoffman not occurred, and a few more points on the board, that just about breaks Penrith. And also the goal kicking. So they're only one from their first 3 attempts, hence the 14 points, and that's the only points they ended up with. The biggest factor for me was the try to Wonga Blake just before half time. I think going in 14-6 down, just psychologically, that does something for a team when you feel like you've been under the pump the whole time. And you look up and you're less than 2 converted scoring plays behind the opposition. That's a massive result. That tells me that there's something in our structure that we're still presenting, even though we don't feel like we're really on top at the moment, that there are some fundamentals that are working for us. And that was really pleasing to see. There's so much excitement and balance of young and experienced players across this Penrith team that excite me. And someone that I was thoroughly impressed with, particularly during the first 25 to 30 minutes when they were really under the pump, was Trent Merrin. Defensively, his intent was fantastic. He looks a few kilos lighter. He just looks like he's stepping up into that leadership role. Whatever's happened behind closed doors with Moylan and Cartwright leaving the club, with Peachy already signing a deal for the following season, whatever's happening that certain players aren't agreeing with, I felt like it's almost forced a number of other players to go the complete opposite direction and buy in even deeper to what the likes of Griffin and Gould are laying down. And that was really evidence in his performance. It was evidence in the 2 guys who were meant to start that ended up coming off the bench that I was raving about in the preview, of Regan Campbell-Gillard and Viliami Kickout. Sorry, I just had a blank there. And didn't Kickout have a fucking wow of a game once he came on, scored that barnstormer of a try, just a little bit of feet, and then just pushing back on that hard line back at the sticks, and just carried Jared Hayne over the line. And that's no easy feat. Jared Hayne is not a flimsy outside back. Anytime a man of kick-out size is able to get a fullback like Bevan French into a legs tackle and then break that, that's ultimately what did it. If French was able to stay into legs and get him at least falling early, that would have given Hayne that much more of an opportunity to stay up over the footy. But as soon as kick-out finished over the top of French and he was able to continue that leg drive, that's what forced that momentum into that rollover. So, great work, and definitely did his job over and above. Wonga Blake was great. Dylan Edwards took him a little while to get into the game. Couple of errors early on, coming out of trouble. I think he had a drop ball out of dummy half when he was looking for a scoot and had a loose carry and got jammed. But yeah, outside of that first 20 minutes, anything under the high ball after that was really positive. So hats off to the young kid there. I think it was either going to work one of two ways. It's like, well, this is the pressure now because I'm the only one at the back, so I need to perform. Does that have a negative effect? Or now that Moylan is gone, there's no one really breathing down my throat as far as genuine fullback contenders go. Now I can play footy stress-free, even though that they did move Moylan into 6 to accommodate for him last year. But yeah, it took a little while to get going. It'll be interesting to see what happens in the Parramatta lineup once Gutherson comes back. Does he go straight back there? There were times where Hayne did play at the back and French went in to the wing, out to the wing, and Hoffman played centre early on. They played around with that. I don't know what the story was, and whether they were coached to start like that and then it got changed. But Josh Hoffman definitely didn't disappoint and didn't do himself any disservice as far as trying to maintain a starting jersey once Gutherson comes back. But you'd have to think, unfortunately, unless Ava'a has something catastrophically go wrong in the next couple of weeks, you'd think that Hoffman will probably be the one who misses out there. So yeah, who would have thought after the first half that Penrith would have finished with 3 minutes more time in possession? They still finished with a worse completion rate. 68% was their completion rate. The Parramatta side was 73%. But yeah, it was the perfect tale of two halves. The player that I found least effective on the pitch was actually James Maloney. Even in the revival of the Penrith side, it ultimately came down to Trent Merrin, Regan Campbell-Gillard, Viliama Kickout, getting them on the front foot, and then Peter Wallace working extremely hard around the ruck, and Nathan Cleary's kicking game. That got them on the front foot. I thought defensively, the intent from Maloney was there. His first up contact was always quite strong, but he's normally renowned quite well for his defence. It's not uncommon, I beg my pardon, for him to get underneath a bigger guy and actually tip him on his back. And that didn't really happen. It looked like he was sort of, I don't know if he was lacking a little bit of game time, a little bit of contact time, but he just looked a little bit out of sorts, Jimmy Maloney. I don't know if he was a little bit put off by Nathan Cleary being confident in steering a ship around. I mean, obviously it's a senior-ish forward pack that's run by kids, in Moylan and Cleary in previous seasons. So I don't know if he's a bit shocked now that he doesn't have to do as much, albeit that Townsend, he's played in grand finals alongside Maloney, and they were still quite solid last year. But whether something there for Maloney psychologically and him not being necessarily relied upon fucked with his involvement, I'm not too sure. But yeah, all will be revealed moving forward for Penrith and seeing how they respond. But that sin bin to Mitchell Moses was absolutely pivotal, and it really just allowed Penrith to stay on the front foot. The penalties that they gave away at crucial times just allowed Penrith to kick those couple of cheap penalty goals that got them that comfy lead. That was more than a converted try, and that's ultimately what did them in. So look, props off to both sides for a thoroughly entertaining game. I don't think it's anywhere near panic stations for Parramatta. They'll be back with vigor. They've got Manly next week, who I'm very confident they can come out and beat even at Brookvale. And Penrith, I think they're only going to continue to get better now that we're seeing the even more continued improvement in the likes of Regan Campbell-Gillard after having a World Cup campaign with the Aussies. So into the final match on Sunday night, and again another tale of two halves. The Titans 30 win an absolute thriller against the Canberra Raiders 28. Now the Raiders were out of the block something fierce. 3 tries within the first 10 minutes to lead 18-0. 18-0. So that's how far the Titans had to come back and claw their way into the match. And if we look down, here, big players in beg your pardon. All right, so completion rates there we see 74% for the Gold Coast Titans and 69% for the Canberra Raiders. So holding the footy, they just couldn't do it. They got absolutely washed out of the game in that first 20 minutes of the second half, and we see their time in possession 42 minutes for the Gold Coast Titans and 28 minutes. So the biggest disparity that we've seen. So that's a big positive for Canberra. So despite the loss and the lack of 2 points, and again, they've got to be careful that they can't get too complacent and say, oh, well, if these certain things go our way, they'll be fine. They lost 8 games by less than 6 points last year. So they can't continue to go down this path of near enough, it should get us close. Because it obviously didn't. It didn't fucking work last year. So they need to make a change right away. They need to work harder on controlling that ball coming out of trouble. Their outside backs, they came up with too many fundamental errors, which is putting too much pressure back on your forward pack, who's already fucking worked their ass to get up the field, and then you come up with a cheap error coming out of trouble. It's a forward's nightmare. It's an absolute pet hate of any front row back rower when an outside back comes out with an error within the first 3 plays coming out of trouble. They just got absolutely pumped. I think they only had like 3. I think I heard a stat. It was only like 3 sets within the first 20 minutes of the second half, and they only completed 1 of those. So you completed 30% within the first 20 minutes, and you had the ball for like 3 or 4 minutes. So they didn't even get the opportunity to fucking do anything with it. So the fact that they only lose by 2 points at the death, the fact that they were able to skip to the lead with BJ Lewis scoring late, I thought it was just about done. It was ice on the cake. But lo and behold, the confidence and obvious progression in maturity of someone like Ash Taylor, who is starting to come along, formed a really neat partnership with Proctor to score. Proctor, I think he only ended up with 1. But that right edge the whole night. Even Conrad Hurrell looked really neat out there. Anthony Don's obviously he's been in the wars. Heard he had the shoulder surgery, then he had an infection within the shoulder, and then he had pancreatitis. So had to wear like a bag that was basically pumping all the bile out of him. So bile, out of him. So he's been in the wars, and so he's only going to get fitter and stronger there. The opposite edge, Copley and Philip Sammy, I think with time they're going to continue to improve. They both scored tries. It shows that they're confident both left and right edges, and that's having that variety there and not unnecessary reliance on one side to the other. It's what also gives the Raiders the opportunities to score the points that they do, because you've got Croker and Kotrick on the left edge, and then you've got Leilua and Rapana on the right edge. So, look, I watched the post-match press conference with Ricky Stewart, and he was undoubtedly super disappointed. But again, sort of puts it back to the fact that you don't hold the footy, you're not going to be much chop. And I guess shining lights for them were the 2 guys that we see here in the top performers, most run meters. Shannon Boyd, I thought probably even more so, not just in attack but defensively, he was phenomenal. And Jack Whiten, his kick returns were great. Brought him back with a lot of vigor. And was rewarded with a try as well within the first few exchanges of both sides. So, look, a lot to like from both teams. in the podcast to preview this round. Blake predicted a high scoring match, and we definitely got that. I think that's going to favour the Titans early on in sort of getting the rub of things, and you're missing some big guys in Jared Wallace to suspension still, and Keegan Hipgrave, who are only going to add more to those to that Gold Coast forward pack. But I thought the tenacity shown by someone like Jai Arrow, who is so small for a front rower, I thought his work rate was really, really good. And then Max King and Boyle coming off the bench were really, really good for guys that are a little bit more inexperienced as well. Having Mitch Rain come off the bench and elicit his experience on the side, that was a big tick in the box for me. I think it shows what he learnt in his time at Penrith, and probably even more so even at the Dragons before that, in being forced to reserve grade and being humbled by that, to take your opportunities when you're given them, but also to be flexible in the way that you play. Nathan Peets, I think he was just a little bit short of some match fitness. I don't think he got any trials, so he was only good for about 40 minutes and only came back on. I think he played the first 30 in the last 10. And Mitch Rain, he just helped square everything up. His passing's so accurate. And when you've got service like that, you can play a bit more up-tempo when you've got a lighter forward pack than the size that Canberra has. So they can actually play into your hands when you're trying to tire out guys like Shannon Boyd and Junior Paulo. That's a big positive to have some quick, fast play out of the ruck. And Mitch Rain definitely did that. So for me, he was the pivotal guy to getting the Titans on the front foot, so that when Canberra were on the back foot, LG and Taylor had time. They had time, they had patience, and they were able to capitalise on that. So hats off to Mitch Rain. He was the pick for me for the Gold Coast Titans. And Shannon Boyd, it's great to see him start to finally live up to some sort of expectation. He was a man amongst boys for such a long time. During the under-20s competition, and it took a little while for him to get going, and I think he's had a few sort of injuries, and then guys come in and out of the club that probably overshadow him a little bit, but it's good to see him playing some good footy to start the season, and if that's the platform that the Titans are laying as well as far as the forwards go. Ryan James on the edge, I thought he looked a little bit out of place. Some of his push on the footy, he was a little bit late or a little bit early, just lacked that timing. So he's only going to get better at that, and was forced to come into the middle just because they were so thin. But yeah, if they can get some combination going there with James and Proctor on each individual edge, I think the Titans are going to have a market increase in performance. But the hard part is you've got so many clubs that are trying to improve. Like the Knights and the Tigers and the Warriors. Unfortunately, someone's got to stay down the bottom. I think we're going to be in for one of the closer seasons, and perhaps we're going to see clubs that we expect to perform a little bit better not go so well. Some unexpected, dreary performances and a bit of a tougher season for some clubs that we expect to perform a bit better. So again, I guess a bit of an apology that it is just me barking down the barrel of the camera. But again, I figure it's better delivering something than nothing. I'll endeavour to get Blake back on here as soon as our timelines match up. I might even get someone else just so we're throwing some footy banner. But I'll definitely be back again by the end of the week to preview for everything round 2. All right, gang. I see some people have been floating in and out of the Facebook live feed. I hope it's offered you some form of entertainment during the day. I imagine that some of you must be on lunch break. So, yeah, thanks for watching. And just for those that are still on, if you shoot over to the YouTube version, perhaps if you didn't catch everything, later in the day, there's a bit of screenplay that I've got there on the NRL website that makes it a little bit more entertaining. Unfortunately, I can't really get any highlights or anything like I did attempt to do last season. Just got done for copyright infringements from the ARL, unfortunately. So I figure I might as well post content that I know is going to be able to get out there, and rather than just hope that it doesn't get taken down. So Yeah, that about sums us up for round one. Finally, we're away. Footy's back. Yeah, I'll see you later in the week. Thanks for tuning in to Footy Rants. I'm Benny Matthews. I'll catch you next time. Catch us.